Today, I want to take you back to a moment in Philadelphia during the American Revolution when the ideals of liberty nearly collapsed under the weight of internal conflict. The date was October 4th, 1779. The war with Britain was still raging, but on that day, the most serious battle in Philadelphia wasn't fought against redcoats. It was fought between Americans themselves, citizens who only 3 years earlier had declared independence in the name of freedom and self-government. This event, known as the Fort Wilson Riot, began as a protest against economic hardship and political exclusion, but it quickly escalated into a violent confrontation in the streets, leaving several dead and many more wounded. At its center stood James Wilson, a signer of the Declaration of Independence and one of the most important legal minds of the founding generation. Wilson's home became the fortress from which he and his allies defended themselves against an angry crowd. The riot itself was brief and bloody, but its consequences were long-lasting. It revealed the deep fractures within revolutionary society, forced Pennsylvanians to confront the limits of democracy, and helped shape the future course of American constitutional development. To understand why this riot occurred, we must step into the political culture of Pennsylvania in the late 1770s. The Revolution was not only a war for independence, but also a debate over what kind of government an independent America should have. In Pennsylvania, that debate took its most radical form. In 1776, the state adopted a constitution that was the most democratic of its time. It established a single-house legislature, weakened the executive branch, and broadened suffrage beyond the property-owning elite. This constitution was celebrated by radicals as the purest embodiment of small-r republicanism, government by the people, without aristocratic privilege or undue concentration of power. But not everyone agreed. Wealthy merchants, landowners, and lawyers, the men we often think of as founding fathers, were deeply uneasy. They feared that unchecked democracy would lead to instability, the trampling of property rights, and mob rule. This more conservative faction began calling themselves Republicans, though in the context of the 1770s, the term signified balance, order, and restraint rather than radical populism. By 1779, the economic situation made these divisions explosive. Inflation was rampant. The cost of basic goods, flour, salt, firewood, skyrocketed, while wages and pay for militia service lagged far behind. Ordinary Philadelphians suspected that wealthy elites were hoarding or profiteering, while the common soldier and laborer bore the true sacrifice of war. It was in this atmosphere that James Wilson became a target. Wilson, a prominent lawyer and delegate to the Continental Congress, was one of the leaders of the Republican faction. On October 4, 1779, a large group of militia members and citizens, already agitated from a meeting at a tavern, marched toward Wilson's home at 3rd and Walnut Streets. Wilson wasn't alone. About 35 allies had gathered with him, including other conservative figures of the Philadelphia elite. Since in danger, they barricaded the house, which soon earned the name Fort Wilson. The crowd surrounded the building. Accounts vary on what triggered the violence. Some say a defender fired from an upstairs window, others that the mob tried to force its way in, but the effect was the same. Gunfire erupted, bricks and musket balls shattered windows. At one point, the attackers even rolled up a cannon in hopes of blasting the defenders out. The fighting raged until Governor Joseph Reed sent in cavalry to disperse the mob. By the time the smoke cleared, 6 people were dead, many more were injured, and Philadelphia was left shaken. Reed later pardoned the rioters, hoping to ease tensions, but the damage had already been done. What then does the Fort Wilson riot tell us about the Revolution? Why does this episode matter? First, it shows that the Revolution was not a single unified struggle for independence. It was also a bitter internal debate over the meaning of liberty. For radicals, liberty meant broad participation, the empowerment of the common man, and the weakening of entrenched elites. For conservatives, liberty meant protection of property, a check on popular passions, and the establishment of an enduring order. The clash at Fort Wilson was the physical embodiment of that ideological divide. Second, the riot demonstrated the fragility of Republican government in its infancy. When citizens resorted to violence in the streets, it revealed how easily political disagreements could spiral into civil unrest. Samuel Shaw, writing shortly afterward, captured the mood when he told a correspondent that there has been hell to pay in Philadelphia. His words remind us that the revolution was never guaranteed to succeed. Internal conflict could have destroyed it from within. Third, the riot marked a turning point in Pennsylvania's politics. Many moderates who had tolerated the radical Constitution of 1776 recoiled from the violence. They concluded that unrestrained democracy endangered stability. In the years that followed, support for the Republican faction grew, and Pennsylvania gradually moved toward a more balanced governmental framework, one that foreshadowed the federal Constitution drafted in 1787. So what's Wilson's legacy? James Wilson survived the attack on his home, and in some ways, it strengthened his political standing. At the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia 8 years later, Wilson was one of the most vocal delegates, surpassed only by Gouverneur Morris in number of speeches delivered. He argued for proportional representation, defended the necessity of a strong executive, and helped shape the presidency as we know it. Wilson became one of only 6 men to sign both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. His experiences in Pennsylvania, including the lessons of Fort Wilson, undoubtedly shaped his conviction that liberty must be balanced by order, and that government must be strong enough to prevent factional violence from tearing society apart. In the grand sweep of revolutionary history, the Fort Wilson Riot might seem a footnote. It did not decide a battle, alter foreign alliances, or directly influence military strategy. But in terms of political development, it was pivotal. It was, in essence, America's first great test of small R Republican government under stress. Could a society committed to liberty prevent itself from collapsing into anarchy? Could the same people who shouted for freedom from Britain restrain themselves from violence against one another? The answer, painfully learned, was that liberty cannot exist without structure. A republic cannot survive if disagreements are resolved through mobs and muskets rather than laws and legislatures. Fort Wilson forced the Revolution's leaders to grapple with the tensions between democracy and stability, a tension that would define American constitutionalism. So when we remember the Revolution as a time of unity and shared sacrifice, let us not forget the barricades at 3rd and Walnut. The Revolution was also a time of division, anger, and civil strife, and yet out of those struggles came a recognition that freedom requires not only passion, but also patience, not only ideals, but also institutions. The Fort Wilson Riot reminds us that the American Republic was born not in perfect harmony, but in fire and conflict. Its survival depended on learning to balance liberty with order, a lesson as relevant today as it was in 1779. I'm Dr. Lucas Wilder. This is History Gone Wilder, and I'll see you next time.